Well, today I have the opportunity to give a sermon. The title of the sermon is The Real Enemy. The Real Enemy. The beginning verse is 2 Thessalonians 2:11. So when you're turning to 2 Thessalonians 2:11, I'm going to read to you from a book that I have here. I enjoy reading other people's material, and I love giving credit for that material as well. In fact, this book is a book we're going to have a fellowship club in 2 weeks in our classroom for the local audience. It's called Take Cover, Finding Peace in God's Protection. And we're going to focus in on that in 2 weeks. We're going to focus in on chapter 7 about self-defense. And although I don't believe we have to have group think, not everyone's going to think the same thing about self-defense. I do want us in that fellowship club, I do want us to discuss this author's rationale of Philip de Courcy, his rationale why he supports self-defense, and we'll discuss it, and then of course we'll be friendly to those who have difference of opinion. But I thought as I've been reading the book, I saw something that I'd like to introduce this presentation with, because this chapter 4's title is The Real Enemy, the same title as my sermon today, The Real Enemy. Let me read as you're turning to 2 Corinthians chapter 1, or chapter 2, here's what de Courcy says. When World War I broke out, the War Ministry in London disseminated a code message to a far-flung British outpost in the heart of Africa. The message from the homeland was decoded, said, quote, "War declared. Arrest all enemy aliens in your district," unquote. This prompted a reply that came back to London saying, quote, "Have arrested 10 Germans, 6 Belgians, 4 Frenchmen, 2 Italians, 3 Austrians, and 1 American. Please advise immediately who we are at war with." And of course, that cute little story means, it's good to know who your enemy is. It goes without saying that when it comes to the pursuit and prosecution of war, you need to know who and what you're up against. The enemy must be clearly identified before they can be engaged. No fighting force wants to go blind into battle regarding the strength, weaponry, location, and tactics of the enemy. And of course, that's what made the warfare over in Vietnam so horrible, because it was so hard to determine who was on this side and who was on that side. Because the South Vietnamese and North Vietnamese looked so much the same, you couldn't tell. And of course, when people switch uniforms, which is a common thing in war, you dress like the other side, if people don't know who they're fighting against, that can be a problem. I guess the same thing can have not quite the same effect over in Afghanistan or over in Iraq, when you can't always know who the enemy is. And of course, that's a problem we have today with all the surveillance and all the spying that goes on. You really can't always know who the enemy is. So de Courcy had a cute little story. As you found 2 Corinthians 2, verse 11, he talks about, lest Satan should take advantage of us. The last phrase is, for we are not ignorant of his devices. We are not ignorant of his devices. So you're Bible students. You've been called by God, and you like to see what God's promises are. You like to understand the methods of the enemy. Before you were baptized, you counted the cost. You counted the cost to make sure if you could go forward with following God, accepting his grace and following God. And so you understood all that. I don't believe, friends, that we are ignorant of his devices. So I want to we'll come back to this chapter, but I want to turn to a couple other places in the Bible first about the enemy. And I call this segment the names and tactics. The names of the enemy and his tactics. He goes by number of names. This handout and this sermon is not going to cover all his names. I think about 10 years ago I gave a presentation, a 4-page handout, all the places in the Bible and how he's identified. I may go back and look at that again and maybe redistribute that again. But let's look at some of the names of the enemy. And as we look at some of the names of the enemy, we can also see the tactics. Let's go to Genesis chapter 3, verses 1 through 4. Genesis 3, verses 1 through 4. The first name of the enemy is the serpent. The serpent. Of course, you know the story of Adam and Eve. It's well known. It's been a part of your foundation for why you follow the Bible, why you follow God. what the enemy does. You're very well aware of what the enemy does. Excuse me. But Genesis 3, verses 1 through 4, he's called the serpent. Now the serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field, which the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, has God indeed said, you shall eat of every tree in the garden? One of his tactics was a methodical question, a purposeful question. Now some people say, well, questions are innocent. Not always. Not necessarily. A statement may not be so innocent. A question may not be so innocent. And this question was not innocent. And that's part of his tactics. Part of the serpent's tactic is to ask a question. And many times, beware of the second question. But because even they did that to Jesus, and quite frankly, Jesus did that as well. If you study his dialogue with people, beware of the second question. See, a lot of times when I hear a first question, I realize, that's a setup question. I'm waiting for the zinger, because someone, instead of having an honest conversation, is trying to make a point or whatever their purpose is. So you have to be careful of the second question. But see, again, so it says, the woman answered, verses 2 and 3, that you can eat of every tree in the garden except one. You cannot eat that one. If you touch it, you will die. Then verse 4, after he asked the question to create doubt, verse 4, then the serpent said to the woman, you shall not surely die. So he directly contradicted what God had said. So the first one was subtle, the second one was direct, and I'm not even sure people always understand even a frontal attack. Many times people are not aware of even a attack that comes right at you. But that was one of the tactics of the serpent at that point. Let's go to Job chapter 1. Job chapter 1. This is where, in this place, the enemy is called Satan. The enemy is called Satan. And I want to mention to you, in chapters 1 and 2, we see what Satan had done. I want to reiterate to you the story of Job. I want to reiterate the story of Job to you. I really like studying Job. I've considered myself a good student of the book of Job. Spent a lot of time studying it, spent a lot of time talking about it. And I'll make this observation to you. Anytime, if you're giving a presentation and you quote the book of Job, be careful who you're quoting. You say, well, Dave, I've heard you say that before. Well, I want to say it again. Be careful who you're quoting. Because if you're quoting the three friends, you're quoting a bad source. Because in the last chapter of the book of Job, it says God did not like what they said. So many times people will just look in the concordance and find something, and they'll quote a wrong source. And I'm telling you, if you hear the book of Job quoted, you want to pay attention who the source is. So a word to speakers and a word to the audience, always be careful of that. But in Job chapter 1, the story is who started the trial? God started the trial. God started the trial in verse 6. Actually, in verse 8, he started the trial when he said, have you considered my servant Job? But you notice it's Satan here. He's called Satan. God started the trial. God opened the door to the trial. Satan provided the details. I want you to remember that, because that may be what's happening in your life. Maybe God started a trial in your life. Maybe God said to you, have you considered my servant Ron? Have you considered my servant Colleen? Have you considered my servant Lisa? See, God may start the trial because he has a righteous purpose. Now, Satan's role many times in the trials is to provide the details. And that's what he did here. He provided the details. He says in verse 11, touch all that he says, touch all that he has, and he'll curse you to your face. Touch all that he has, and he'll curse you to your face. And God said, okay, I approve your details. I approve your plan. But he still put a boundary on him, says you can't lay a hand on him. You can't touch him. So God's still in charge. When God allows something, he's still in charge. But the fact is, Satan provided the details. In chapter 2, he came back again with some new details. In verse 5, he says, stretch out your hand. This is Satan saying, stretch out your hand and touch his bone, and I'll curse you to your face. In verse 6, God said, okay, I'll accept your details. You can touch his flesh, but you can't kill him. God's still in charge, but Satan provides the details. So if you have a trial in your life, the trial could certainly be something that God initiated. But the details may come from an enemy who's not wanting to help you. And I think it's important to know that. By the way, as one thing Neil mentioned, in chapters 1 and 2, the first reaction was he didn't talk against God, he didn't complain. And just for the record, if the book of Job stopped after Job 2, that would have been the record. But verses 3 through 42 shows that Job did complain. And so again, just so you know that, initially he did not complain after the first trial. Initially he did not complain after the second trial. But the whole rest of the book of Job shows him complaining. And that's a mistake. I hear many preachers make that mistake. In fact, I went to a funeral up in Wisconsin back in 2005. There was a church shooting up there, and I had some friends who were shot in that church. And so I went up to some of the funerals. Dixon went up there as well. Dixon went to at least one more funeral than I went to. But I went to some funerals, and I was sitting there listening to the man. In fact, many people came up to me and said, are you doing this funeral? And I was not asked to do the funeral. I didn't expect to be asked to do the funeral, although I would have taken it as an opportunity to try to do some good. But the man started talking from the book of Job, and I'm thinking, yes, good choice. But he wasn't accurate in what he said, and unfortunately, he's probably never done a funeral like that before, so I don't want to throw stones at him, but he missed an opportunity because he did not really clearly explain the book of Job, and it was just a missed opportunity back then. But again, Satan certainly, he's identified as Satan, and he makes recommendation of details. Matthew chapter 4. You know the trial, the temptation of Christ. Here he's called the devil. Matthew 4, verse 1, when Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And he tempted Christ 3 different ways. And the first 2 ways especially, he kind of egged him on. He kind of challenged him to be very careful of people trying to manipulate you. Satan is a manipulator. That's why you have to be careful of salespeople. There are good salespeople and there are bad salespeople. Be careful of politicians. There are, politicians. I don't want to say if they're good or bad. If the shoe fits, wear it. Be careful of people trying to sell you something through manipulation. Because basically he said, if you be the Son of God, make these stones into bread. Kind of like challenging him. Are you really the Son of God? Are you really important to God? Are you who you really say you are? Is God really for you? Are you a braggadocio guy? That's what the devil's approach is. And then the next trial was, if you be the Son of God, jump, and God will catch you. Well, can you be egged on? Can you be challenged? Can you be manipulated into doing something you shouldn't do? We say, he was clearly challenged. Yeah, but he was challenged on Satan's terms. He wasn't challenged on God's terms. But thankfully, each time the Son of God responded correctly. He was not going to be manipulated by the devil. The next one, I'm just going to give you these because of time. You can later on turn to 2 Corinthians 4, verses 3 through 4. That's 2 Corinthians 4, verses 3 through 4. There he's called the God of this world. The God of this world who blinds the light of the gospel. So again, God is the overall God of the world, but God has stepped back for a purpose. God has stepped back for a plan. And God has allowed the adversary to be there for his ultimate good. In other words, people have access to evil to hopefully do what is right. People have access to evil to actually turn to God and do what is good. But God has allowed evil there for a contrast so people can make a choice. The next one I'm going to give you, you can turn to, is 2 Corinthians 11, verses 13 through 15. I repeat, 2 Corinthians 11, verses 13 through 15. There he calls himself an angel of light. We say, well, he's not an angel of light. No, but he calls himself that. Is it any wonder in today's world that people call themselves things that they aren't? Isn't it ironic that many times people will call themselves the opposite of what they are? It's really interesting to watch, and especially in the political world, people who are committing a certain way of life, not only do they pretend they're not doing it, they attack the other party, the other person. The very thing they do, they loudly and persistently call somebody else. Now, why would they do that? Because it works. It works regularly. And so what you watch people saying things are so outlandish. People will say, they'll say such and such, and it's like, that's not even true at all. But then you watch your friends believe it, you watch a lot of people believe it, it's like, what is going on? It works. He called himself an angel of light, and he was anything but an angel of light. Another one I want you to consider is Ephesians 2, verses 2 and 3. That's Ephesians 2, verses 2 and 3. He's called the prince of the power of the air. As the prince of the power of the air, he works up desires in people. He works up the desires of our flesh, the desires of our mind, and he works up people to be mad. He causes people to be emotional rather than to be factual and truthful. So again, we see what his names are. I'm giving his names, and I'm not taking the time because I want to spend more time in the last scriptures, and I don't want to cut into that time. And then in the book of Revelation, he's called, and this is in Revelation 12:9, Revelation 12:9, he's called the dragon, the serpent, the devil, and Satan, all four. He's called the dragon, the serpent, the devil, and Satan when it says he deceives the whole world. So he's a deceiver. That's what he does. So again, I've given you just a few of his names, not all of his names. I've given you a few of his names, and I've mentioned those scriptures that show his tactics. So I want you to at least be aware of that, because he is the real enemy. Now, let's go back to 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 11. And I want you to realize, so 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 11, is a reaction to the previous letter in 1 Corinthians. So I guess we actually can go to 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 1. 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 1. Now I'm going to make 2 points here through this to show you his tactics, because I want you to realize it can help you in how you deal with other people, and probably even more important, in my opinion, it can help you analyze who you are in your relationship with God. See, we're going to see in 1 Corinthians 5 that the congregation was too easy on other people. Then we're going to see in 2 Corinthians 2, the congregation could have been too hard on other people. So as often is the case, we sometimes see the contrast, the pendulum on both sides. God does not want us to be too easy on people, and God doesn't want us to be too hard on people. You say, great, Dave, we all know that. We all know that. Why are you bringing that up? Well, I'm trying to hope by talking about it and discussing it, I can help you not be on either extreme. I can help you to be more in the middle where you're supposed to be. And since we all vacillate, and since we all go back and forth, I'm hoping that you'll recognize the times when you're too easy on people, and you'll recognize the times when you're too hard on people, and with the help of God's Spirit, you can get back to the middle of how you're supposed to treat people. You say, is that something we all should do? Something I need to do? Something we all need to do. We're going to see in 1 Corinthians 5, they were too easy on people. And sometimes, friends, you're too easy on yourself. And then when we get to 2 Corinthians 2, we're going to see that they weren't supposed to be too hard on them. They're supposed to finally have that right balance. So let's go to 1 Corinthians 5, verses 1 through 5. This is what happened Paul was reacting to later. It is actually reported that there is sexual immorality among you in the church at Corinth. And let me say this again. I feel sorry for the church at Corinth because this letter to the church at Corinth is in the Bible. That's how the church at Corinth is known. I would hate for our congregation here to be known at the worst part of our history. I hope we could be in the book of Acts, a future book of Acts, as the best part of our history. I hope we would not be known as a point that would be our low point, either individually or collectively. See, that's the problem the Corinthian church had. Because it's in the Bible, people don't know all the good things that happened in the church of Corinth. They know there was a time there was sexual immorality in that congregation. And it wasn't even named among the Gentiles. Yikes. These church people were doing things that the unchurched should they do, but they should, even the unchurched shouldn't do it. Even the unchurched would be criticized for it, but these were church people doing it. These were people naming Christ doing it. Yikes. Because a man had his father's wife. Verse 2, here was his correction to the congregation. And you as a congregation are puffed up. You're not even mourning that this person who's done this should be taken away from you. This person should not be in the congregation temporarily, hopefully not very long, but to get this man's attention, this should be removed from the congregation. And someone could say, yeah, but sir, Paul, we're trying to have love. Good, love is good. But there's a time for tough love. Now again, our whole life should not be tough love. Our whole life should certainly not be meanness. But in this actual fact here, this congregation was being too easy on this person. So not only was Paul disappointed in the person with sexual immorality, he was disappointed in the congregation. Verse 3 says, for indeed as I am absent in body but present in spirit, I've already judged. I've heard enough information. I've heard both sides of the story. Even though I'm not there, because they didn't have cars, airplanes to get around. So even though I'm not there, I know what you should do. In the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, when you're gathered together, this person should be removed from the congregation. Now, someone could say, has the subject of disfellowship or excommunication been abused? Absolutely. When I see in the world, churches, most disfellowships or excommunication have been for unbiblical reasons. Many have been for political reasons within the congregation. So I'm not for massive disfellowships. I'm not for massive excommunications. I'm not for clergy or congregations abusing their responsibility. But I am reading from the scripture that in this case, this was a reason why the person should have been removed from the congregation. Should this happen once a year? Should it happen once a month? Let's hope it only happened. Hopefully it only happened once in Corinth. I'm hoping in the whole history of the book of the congregation of Corinth, in the book of 1 Corinthians, that this was not an ongoing event. So please, anyone out there who considers themselves a church leader, please do not use this verse to amass power to yourselves, to run roughshod over the people of God, or to try to abuse the people of God. Quite frankly, the people of God, children of God, don't let them do it to you. They don't have the authority to do that. But I'm reading a situation where Paul said it was justified for this man to be removed from the congregation. So here's a case where people were too easy on the man. And I want you to extrapolate a little bit. Are there times you're too easy on yourself? Meaning, are there things you're doing in private that because you love God's grace, you accept God's grace, and God is full of grace, do you then allow yourself to not be so serious about overcoming and not so serious about obeying? We're coming up to the Passover season. And the Passover season is about grace. And the days of unleavened bread are about, because of God's grace, what should we do? How should we change? In fact, if we kept on reading, that's what he's talking about here in the segment about Passover and the days of unleavened bread. That we receive grace, but after we receive grace, we need to do the right thing. I was dealing with a situation of a person not in the church of God. And this person was just wanting to complain and complain and complain and complain and complain and complain and complain. And after days and after weeks of listening to this person complain, there's kind of a theory. One of my favorite people in the world is Tony Dungy. And Tony Dungy, he wrote a book, and in this book he wrote about his dad saying, as I remember the book, Tony Dungy quoted his dad saying, "You should never let anyone vent." I like Tony Dungy, and I bet I would like his dad. But I have a little disagreement about that. I believe you can let people vent for a short period of time. In my ministry, allow people to vent for a short period of time. Hopefully they can squeeze the poison out of it. But some people don't want to vent for a short period of time. They want to vent and vent and vent and vent. And when that happens, just like with this case I'm telling you about, I have to sometimes say, I don't think I'm the person to help you. Because quite frankly, I'm tired of hearing the venting. Where is the change? Where's the commitment to change? Where's the effort to change? I gave you a little time to vent. We tried to squeeze that poison out, but you don't want to squeeze the poison out. You want to spend the rest of your life venting. By the way, you know what happens when I tell them I can't help them? You know what else they do? They go find someone else to vent to. And then when that person says they're done with them, they go find someone else to vent to. And there are people out there who bounce around finding someone they can vent to because all they want to do is complain. Again, I believe that letting people vent, it can be a good thing as long as it leads to change, as long as it leads to what are we going to do about it. And so again, I think there is value in that. So again, now let's go to 2 Corinthians chapter 2. And let's go, this is the follow-up to what we just read. 2 Corinthians 2, beginning verse 6. This punishment which was inflicted by the majority is sufficient for such a man. The punishment that they gave him in 1 Corinthians 5 was now sufficient. It was sufficient. So now we're going to hold a grudge against this man for the rest of his life? Is this man going to be marked for the rest of his life? Is he going to be barred for the rest of his life because he made a mistake? And people can realize that even there have been times in my pastoring, they could say, Dave, you were disappointed with me for a while. I said, yes, because I told you. You didn't have to guess. I communicated directly to you. You didn't have to guess. You didn't have to read my mind. I believed in communication, and you heard it. But they say, well, Dave, you didn't hold that against me forever. Of course not. Well, God wouldn't want us to do that. There's a period of time, then you move forward. You move forward and put the past behind and forget about it. And that's what Paul's saying here. Paul's saying that was sufficient. On the contrary, you ought rather to forgive the man and comfort him, lest perhaps he's swallowed up with too much sorrow, because the enemy is going to try to beat him up while he's no longer among the body of Christ, or that aspect of the body of Christ. So God's going to try to comfort him, and God's saying, you do your part. You bring him back and you comfort him. Therefore, I urge you to reaffirm your love toward him. For to this end I also wrote, that I might put you to the test, whether you are obedient in all things. I guess that's Paul's way of saying, I wanted to see if you would listen when it was time to put him away. I want to see if you're listening if it's time to bring him back. Verse 10, now whom you forgive anything, I also forgive. He's taking ownership with the people. It wasn't the leader against the people. It was the leader and the people saying, hey, congregation, we're in this together. I forgive him, you forgive him. Let's work together to love this man. We're together. I'm not against you, congregation. You're not against me. Let's work together to love this man. For if indeed I have forgiven anything, I have forgiven that one for your sake in the presence of Christ, lest Satan should take advantage of us, for we are not ignorant of his devices. That's the context of the phrase I started out with. That's the context of we're not ignorant of his devices. So my friends, I'm trying to help you today, especially as you approach Passover, but even not just approaching Passover, just living your daily life. Are there times you're too easy on people? Are there times when you're too hard on people? Are there times when you're too easy on yourself? Are there times when you're too hard on yourself? I want to conclude with two scriptures to help you consider how you treat other people and how you deal with them. Let's look at 2 Corinthians 10, verses 1 and 2. When I mention this, and I'll tell you, you'll say, Dave, every time you read this scripture, you give a kind of a warning, or you kind of give a disclaimer. I'm going to give the same disclaimer. 2 Corinthians 10, verses 1 and 2 works when you're dealing with someone who's mature, converted, in a great relationship. There are some relationships where you don't follow this advice. And specifically, when you're a teacher, you don't follow this advice. When you're a boss, you may not follow this advice. There could be certain situations where you don't follow this advice. Because what he's basically saying is start out nice and easy. But all my teacher friends tell me, you don't start out nice and easy. You start out kind of firm and rules-oriented because you can always loosen up. As a boss, it's better to start out with high expectations. High expectations, everyone knows what they're supposed to do, and you can always go to mercy. But if with your spouse, start out gentle. With your kids, I hope you can start out gentle. I suppose if you have a troubled child, you might have to start out firmer. With your friends in the congregation, start out gentle. With your pastor, start out gentle. Pastor, with your congregation, start out gentle. This advice works in most relationships, although there are some where it doesn't work. Now it says, now I, Paul, myself, am pleading with you by the meekness and gentleness of Christ. That's how you start. Who in presence am lowly among you, but being absent I'm bold toward you. I beg you that when I come, that I don't have to be bold. In relationships where you're dealing converted person to converted person, mature person to mature person, in a situation where there's freedom and you don't have to worry about future punishment as a teacher, future punishment as a boss, let's always be kind to each other. Let's start out kind first. And if we have to be bold, we go to bold. And you say, well, man, I know a lot of people that way, but I know some people, they just mad all the time. They're in your face all the time. They're always correcting everybody. They're always judging everybody. They're always putting somebody down. Yeah, I know those kind of people too. And a lot of those people have anger issues in their life, and they haven't learned how to deal with other people. Some of the most obnoxious people who get in someone's face really have deep internal problems and they haven't worked through yet. It's not very enticing. It's not very warm. And yes, we have to deal with that. I mean, I deal with a lot of sweet people like you. But occasionally I'll deal with someone who's just cranky. It's like, oh, really? You're going to start out cranky right now? Then I want to handle it the right way. I want to be the mature person how I handle it. But I give you this advice, and I want to go to Galatians 6, verse 1. Galatians 6, verse 1. Brethren, if a man be overtaken in a trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in the spirit of gentleness. The King James says the spirit of meekness. My New King James says a spirit of gentleness. See, I want to point this out to you because the real enemy is out there. He's out there against your friends and the people you come in contact with. When you see them make a mistake, you have to analyze, what's the best way to handle this? I don't want to be too easy on them. I don't want to be too hard on them. Maybe I can start with meekness and gentleness. And maybe it won't even be my place to be bold toward them. Maybe I'll let God have someone else be bold to them. But whatever you do in your relationships, try to find results. Try to find conclusions. Don't worry about trying to be right. Try to find results. Try to be edifying. Because, see, the enemy out there wants to stir things up. He will ask you methodical questions. He will contradict God. He will tell the Father to have details about you that are horrible details, and God may let it happen for your good. He may try to tempt you through manipulating you. He will try to blind you from light and truth. He will call himself an angel of light when he's anything but. He's a prince of the power of the air who will stir up your desires, stir up your mind, stir up your life. He'll try to deceive you as he deceives the whole world. I want you to think back on the man in Corinth who needed a little tough love for a little while. Even though most of your life you'll be giving sweet love to people. And most of your life you'll need to only receive sweet love, but sometimes you may need a little tough love. But remember this, you don't want to be too easy, but you don't want to be too hard. You don't want to be too hard on yourself. So please try to find as much meekness and gentleness as you can, boldness when it's necessary, and whenever you want to have good results, hopefully we can restore each other, and hopefully God can restore us in the spirit of meekness. I give you these things because there's an enemy out there. There's a real enemy out there.